Skal jeg vinke til deg når du har litt tid?
Det kan du gjerne. Ja. Okay, I'm Jonas, and I'm going to talk to you about blockchain and geospatial applications. And the centralized mindset is pretty widespread, actually, in the geospatial industry. By the way, I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to talk really fast. So when you look at a map, all the data you see on the map more or less represents centralized structures, infrastructure, property borders, etc., administrative borders, urban planning, you name it. Also, the vast amount of geolocation data that we produce with our mobile devices in our pockets is often also uploaded to centralized systems, you know, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And I see a need to disrupt that. So here's just basically how a traditional geospatial architecture looks like. We've got data storage typically in a relational spatial database or repository. We've got the distribution, which is centralized, and we've got the processing, which often takes place on the servers as well. Let's look at one of the most basic use cases for geospatial applications, which is the transfer of land ownership, right? So we've got this little geometry here, and let's say that I want to buy a piece of land from you. So I give you some money, you give me your piece of land. Sure. It's just a transaction between two people, really. But unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but I need a proof of ownership. And that's why we end up with these centralized systems, where there's a few people who control a registry for a huge area, typically a nation state. And then when this transaction takes place, I also have to give them lots of money, and then they change the registry and transfer the ownership to me. And that's an extra cost, it's a single point of failure, and it requires universal trust amongst everybody within that area, which is essentially impossible in practicality. So that's where the blockchain comes in, with eliminating that overhead, and takes it back to the transaction between two people, and it's already happening. Just last month, this came out in Honduras. They were struggling with corruption and fraud in the real estate business, and they're now implementing a blockchain solution to that. So seen from from my perspective as a geospatial expert, what I need to be able to do on a blockchain architecture is to read and write geospatial data on this architecture, and I need to be able to perform spatial queries and operations on it, and such as, you know, check whether this piece of land is not actually owned by somebody else before I buy it. That is a spatial query with a geometry in it. There's a whole bunch of platforms existing, and there's a very strong open source community actually in the geospatial industry. So just to take the existing systems, what is a spatial database? Well, it's a database that has native support for geometry and geography data types. And with just a few lines of SQL, you can get a lot of useful stuff out of it. So just a simple native function like that, you can perform a proximity analysis. In this case, finding all the Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants within 20 miles of this particular highway. And that's really handy to be able to do that. Other use cases I can imagine that involve geospatial aspects are, you know, say cars negotiating lane space with each other automatically and paying for it, or paying for the road that they drive on. It could be passengers paying automatically when they travel, or drones negotiating the use of airspace when they fly over a piece of land. There's also alternatives to Uber based on blockchain. That's also has a geospatial aspect, and Airbnb also has a strong geographical aspect to it. So from my perspective, and you know, I'm sort of a rookie here. I really want to get into blockchain. I just started, so this is kind of my requirements. Just summarize. I want to work with this. I want to develop an architecture that has native support for spatial data types, and I see a lot of potential uses and unmet needs for disrupting this industry with you know, increased privacy and autonomy, where people control their own data, and yeah, lots of potential the way I see it. So if you want to know more about it, and if you're interested, let's get together and start something. And you will find me on that URL. Right, that's it.